In one of my previous videos, I had talked about, which I'll link the video up top, talking about oil and how mysteriously during all these different times where in 2007 and in 2008 and 2009, where oil prices were very high, there were also a string of refinery fires in places like in Puerto Rico and in other parts of the world where there's all these mysterious explosions that were going on. And I'll link that video up top. And this time period is no different, right? As we're seeing here, which is the Aramco, which is a Saudi Arabian oil refinery being attacked. And of course, you can see a very large explosion. And this is by no means the only explosion that has gone on. There's been numerous oil refineries that have been attacked, explosions going on in all different areas, ships being attacked. And of course, obviously with the high price of oil, it is incentivized to keep oil prices high. Of course, high oil prices mean higher prices for shipping, which means higher prices for everything that you're going to pay for in the supermarkets, food, clothing, anything that has to be shipped with the utilization of petroleum is going to increase in price. So it's clothing, just literally just about everything. Everything plastic related are going to go up. And I don't perceive prices coming down anytime soon, especially not this year. We might, and if anything, we'll see prices actually continue to rise because most of the companies that I'm invested in are all talking about raising their prices. Companies like, for example, Kroger, Tyson recently got hit where a lot of the poultry, they were deemed, they had bird flu infection and hundreds of thousands of birds had to be culled. And of course, this is going to raise prices moving forward, especially with, problems with finding people to work because maybe everybody was pushing for the fight for 15 and then now you got your 15, but $15 isn't enough for many individuals to work. And so either they're living off of the government, maybe they're living with family, maybe they've dramatically reduced their spending. A lot of people are utilizing credit cards nowadays. And if you haven't done anything, this is why I said in quite a few videos before about one, about trying to acquire land, and two, planting food. I think that was the last community post that I had left, which was buy food. And if you have land, if you have soil, plant food, plant seeds, and buy fertilizer. And as you've seen, the price of fertilizer has gone up and will continue to trade higher. I'm invested in, you can see all the stocks. I'm invested in wheat. I'm invested in Mosaic, which is a fertilizer company. I'm invested in corn. I'm invested in oil. I'm invested also in coal, stocks like BTU, and along things like Kroger, Tyson, FLO, which is another flour company. Now, moving forward, these things are going to continue to trade higher because the inflation isn't going to go anywhere. The government wants inflation. And I said this previously in a couple of videos, I think it was sometime in the middle of last year, that the government's goal is to try to inflate the debt away. Now, that hasn't been successfully done ever in humanity, and it always leads to hyperinflation. Now, all the things that the government is doing are leading to the eventual hyperinflation. And the hyperinflation will come when America loses its reserve status. That's when you'll experience the hyperinflation. As those dollars become now worthless or more worthless, people will then want to send them back to pay off their debts to the government or to utilize them to purchase either land or houses, etc. And that will cause dramatic inflation to happen in the country. And many people will be made poor. And so one of the easiest ways that you can fight back against inflation is, of course, by having a skill. And I've talked this numerous times for many young men who, if you didn't listen to me when I was talking in 2020 or in 2021, hopefully you will listen today. One of the most important things that you can have is a skill by going to a trade school, whether you learn like carpentry or if you learn electrician, masonry, something that you can do with your hands. And that skill can follow you no matter where you go. Maybe you take on engineering, construction, etc., right? Become an electrician, become a roofer. Taking on something that you can do with your hands that is a skill that is going to be required regardless of what happens in the economy. And if things go tits up in the country, you can be like, you know what? I will go to this country and I'll take my tools with me and I'll search for work there. And of course, you should always, if possible, have an exit strategy. And I've talked about this for quite some time. When it all goes away, when it all goes belly up, many people are going to be on UBI, which is why you're hearing a lot of universal, either universal basic income. They're now talking about, most recently, this is an article from the Hedge, which I'll link below, where they're talking about giving individuals $400 checks for every car owner in the state. It's about $11 billion. It will more than likely balloon even higher to that. Europe is doing that. I believe Canada is doing it. The UK, Germany, and of course, now America is talking about it. And even though people look at this and they'd be like, well, great, we can use the money because gas prices are so expensive. But the problem is now you're going to have more dollars that people did not work for, right? And an economy is nothing more than goods and services. Either you're trading your labor, which is what all fiat currency is. It's just a physical way for you to trade your labor that you have now stored in a bill, whether it's a $20 bill, etc., right? So you take that fiat currency, and it's just a representation of your labor, and then you're using it to buy other people's labor. This is your stored labor, and you're just using it to buy food, right? You're using it to buy food that is produced by somebody else's labor, or medical necessities, or having a roof over your head. This is all that you're doing with a fiat currency. It's just basically an IOU, because this is your stored labor. So for many people who have not worked for that money, it creates excess currency. That, of course, that will just cause the price of oil or whatever that the government incentivizes to go up. And so when the government does this, this is just going to cause oil and gas to go up, which is, of course, is going to cause food prices to rise. And we're already on the way because we're already having food shortages. Joe Biden talked about this. I believe it was yesterday, where he said the food prices, the food shortage is going to get real. And of course, we're all in this together. And so basically all of you have to be poor to support what's going on, the attack that's going on in Ukraine. Now, for many people, one of the most important things you can do, which is why I've said it, if possible, buy land. And even more important than having necessarily access to land is having access to a community to work collectively with other individuals. Because you living by yourself, as a hermit somewhere, most people are not going to want to live that way. And the only way that you can push back against the bad stuff that is going to come when food shortages and riots start is you have to have community, right? The Jews in New York weren't really worried about the mandates when Cuomo and de Blasio were pushing back against the Jewish community. The Jewish community was able to push back. Why? Because they own their neighborhoods, they own the businesses, they own the hospitals, right? They own the schools, and so it was difficult. And during that time period, and that's why I talked about all these different articles, very anti-Semitic articles from both de Blasio and as well as Cuomo, pushing back against the Jewish community because they really didn't care about whatever mandate that the state put in play. They were basically going to do whatever they were going to do. Were they still going to hold church services? Yes, they were. And there were numerous instances where they had parties, gatherings, weddings, etc., with dozens and dozens, if not sometimes hundreds of people. And it was because they had a community, and basically they were able to push back. Have you heard anything from the Mormon community or any of these other religious communities that live perhaps maybe in the middle of the country worried about mandates? No. Because why? Because they own everything within their neighborhood. They have community and they depend upon each other. And this is one of the things that many Americans have forgotten. Many of them typically live in the cities and basically become dependent upon the state. And this is how they're able to ensnare you. And that's why I said you're better off trying to find like-minded individuals. If you know a group of people who perhaps want to do an investment and want to go and purchase some land and cultivate that land and then start to build up a community and then invite trusted members and look for skilled craftsmen to expand your community, that would be the wise thing to do, because the government's goal is to herd you into cities. This is kind of the point of creating these very, very high prices, right? If you live in a city, like if you're living in New York, you're probably not worried about the gas prices. Yes, you're going to be impacted by food, but most people don't have a car because you have access to buses and trains. And so while maybe the bus fares will go up a little bit, but you don't have to worry about the price of fuel, because typically most of those individuals just utilize mass transit. And this is the goal. Remember, the goal is communism, right? I've talked about this numerous times. In the world where you will own nothing and be happy, at least that's what they say, the goal is to make things so expensive that it drives you into the arms of those who have created basically the emergency. This is the point, is to collapse the energy sector and then to seize it as a means of production. Right? This is the whole point of what happens in socialism, socialistic societies. This is what they do. The goal in communism is to seize the means of production. And this is basically what the government is doing. They're creating a narrative in the energy sector, right? That's why Europe stopped producing oil and electricity. They basically shut down all of their nuclear power plants. We saw this in France and in Germany during the time period where they were having an energy crisis. It made absolutely no sense. But the point is to seize the means of production. If you understand that this is the end goal, then everything else makes sense. Everything else makes sense. And this is what they do. They did the same thing with housing, right? They seize the means of production in terms of housing. And so what does it do? It causes shortages. We're seeing this now in the energy sector, and of course it's impacting the food sector. And this is the whole point, is so that the government come in, after they've created the problem, they can then swoop in and then pretend that they can create the solution to the problem. And the solution is less freedom, more government. How do you combat that? By living away from the cities and having community. And of course, like I said, the people who are going to be less impacted are people who are willing to produce. Productive members of society will be less impacted than people who want to live off of the system. And there are a lot of people that want to live off of the system. The end result is starvation. And we're going to see this moving forward over the next couple of years. You're going to hear primarily in places, for example, like in Africa, and they're talking about this now, that there's going to be a global famine. And it's as a result of communism. Communism always kills people, because what happens is people just stop working, they become reliant on the state, and they believe that someone else is going to produce, because the government says, well, we're going to rob them to give to you. And this has been going on for quite some time. Now we're just seeing it more on a global scale. The global supply chain is going to go away, and it's going to introduce, that's why you see all this talk about the bugs and milk from roaches and all this sort of craziness, is because they understand that the outcome is going to be is that a lot of people are going to die, and they're going to try to find ways to appease the people as the people start to look to the government and say, please, government, do something, save us, right? But if you have your own homestead, if you have your own land, if you have your own community, you will be less impacted by what is coming. That is basically my advice to those currently who watch this video. Have a skill, find like-minded individuals, and create a community. You don't have a lot of time. Even though this thing is moving along, and it felt, in 2020 and 2021, where people were talking about food shortages. I had talked about this extensively, and people feel, well, this is probably not going to be anytime soon. But you're starting to see how quickly these things are unfolding. And the best thing that you can do is to be prepared. This is not necessarily about being a prepper. This is learning to be independent. And that's why I've talked about in other videos. When the state pushes back, what do they threaten you with, right? We're going to exclude you from our society. We're going to cut you off from our system, like what they did with Russia. You saw what Canada did with the people who were cut off. They had their bank accounts frozen. They had their Bitcoin frozen, right? And so this is what they do. They threaten you with freedom because they realize that the people have become dependent. And so that's what they become fearful of. If we're going to exclude you from the health system, right? You're not going to be able to come into our hospitals if you don't have, right? You're not going to be able to buy or sell. And that will impact people who don't want to go out there and be in a community where you have to, as they say, rough it. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you think, and I'll check you out next time.